few months ago, the Vice President of the United States and a recently minted new Roman Catholic convert was in an interview, and he began to speak about a Roman Catholic moral teaching called the Ordo Amoris, or Order of Love. Now, he explained that this teaching meant that you needed to prioritize those who you choose to love, that you need to start with those who are closest to you, that your family comes first, and then you take care of your closest neighbors and your community, then your country, and after that, you can think about immigrants and maybe foreigners. Now, the assumption behind what he was saying was that love is limited, a limited quantity. The more you love, the less love there is to go around. And so you need to make sure that you give that love to those closest to you first. Now, I am absolutely no expert on Roman Catholic moral teaching. I'm not going to argue with him. But I will note that he did get some pushback from people who are experts, including one particular American bishop named Robert Prevost, who tweeted back to him that he was dead wrong. And given that Prevost has since changed his name to Leo XIV, I think maybe the guy knew what he was talking about. But that is the struggle that comes with the question of loving others, and in particularly loving our neighbors, a clear teaching of the Bible. We want to define our neighbors only as those that we already love or already want to love. When a man asked Jesus who was his neighbor, Jesus knew that was exactly what that man was trying to do. But Jesus was brilliant. And he didn't just tell the man that loving your neighbor meant loving those you didn't feel like loving, because that would have only made the man defensive. No, instead Jesus told a story. And stories are these wonderful things because they get in under people's defenses. A good story can help you to see a complete stranger in sympathetic ways. And the story that Jesus told was powerful, but actually more powerful than we often realize. Now, people know this parable of Jesus really well. And there's a number of things they get right about it. They recognize that Samaritans and Judeans, Samaritans were people that Judeans, people like Jesus, despised. And it is generally understood that Jesus was saying that loving your neighbor needs to include loving people you do not like and are not like you. So far, so good. But Jesus was also saying more than that. For one thing, he doesn't actually seem to be saying that his fellow Judeans ought to love Samaritans, at least not directly. No, instead he gives an example of a Samaritan who loves a Judean. And given the twisted relationship between Samaritans and Judeans, that was actually a much more powerful story for Jesus to tell. But we need to kind of enter into his story to appreciate that. So that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to introduce you to Hiel of Samaria. Hiel of Samaria was on his way home, finally, from Jericho. Now, Hiel never liked going to Jericho, never liked traveling so deep into Judean territory, but Jericho was an important hub for trading throughout the whole region. And Hiel had done well for himself in his business lately. He had his own donkey for the transport of goods and more than a couple of denarii jangling in his purse. But the trade he engaged to passed through Jericho. And so he had to make periodic trips up there. It was unavoidable. The main road out of Jericho went across the plain and up into the hills towards Jerusalem. Now, Hiel had absolutely no intentions of going to the big city of Jerusalem. He despised the place. But it made sense to follow the well-worn trail for several leagues before turning off north towards Samaria. Now, Hiel was aware that because so many trade goods passed along this road, it was a frequent target for bandits and thieves. He'd always been lucky so far, but whenever he traveled here, he felt vulnerable. And so he was always aware of his surroundings, viewing everyone else with a great deal of suspicion. He sighed and urged his donkey to a faster pace. This journey always gave him a lot of time to think. Why is it, he asked himself, why is it that the Judeans hate us so much? Because it's not because we've ever done anything to them. We never attacked them, never confiscated their land or desecrated their temple, did we? No, come to think of it, those are all things that Judeans have done to us over the last century or so. Their only grievance with us is the way that we worship. And we worship the same God. We follow the same scriptures, or at least they're pretty much the same. It is just, they say, that we worship God in the wrong place, and we have different traditions when we do it. That's it. That's it. And it's not as if we could do anything to change their opinion of us, because we aren't welcome to worship in their temple in Jerusalem, and no reform of our worship would ever be good enough for them. So really, it's nothing we've done to them to make them hate us, and there's nothing we could do to make them stop. Is it any wonder I always feel so helpless every time I pass through Judea? As Hiel continued along the road, a man was approaching from the other direction. As was abundantly clear from the man's fancy robes and his high attitudes, he was one of the priests of the Jerusalem temple. As he went past, Hiel fully expected that the man would insult him, maybe even spit at him, as such priests loved to do whenever they saw Samaritans. But much to his surprise, the priest did nothing of the sort. Rather than displaying the haughtiness for which the priesthood was so famous, in fact, he appeared flustered and spooked, as if he'd seen some horror. Soon after him along the road came a Levite. Now the Levites also worked in the temple in Jerusalem, carrying out more menial tasks. As this man approached, his attitude was much like the priests had been. In fact, he was so upset that he hurried by, scarcely even looking at Hiel, not giving him a glance, much less the customary sneer that he usually would have received. The Samaritan had no idea what was going on, but honestly, he was happy to see these men so upset. I mean, the Judeans had done enough, more than enough, to destroy the worship and the priesthood of the Samaritans over the years. It was good to see them suffering. Just over a century ago, and quite unprovoked, the Judeans had come and had attacked Samaria and Galilee. In a series of bloody battles, they had taken control of the land, dispossessing many Samaritans and Syrians alike. That alone was more than affront enough. But even worse, around that same time, they had come into the heart of the land of Samaria and destroyed their most holy place. They had completely razed the temple of the Lord on Mount Gerizim and killed all of its priests. And ever since, they have prevented us from rebuilding. Hiel had been to that mountain many times to attend sacrifices and festivals. And there, among the ruins that the Judeans had left, the Samaritans continued to worship in defiance of what had been done to them. Oh, they tried to make it so we couldn't worship, Hiel muttered. But we show them. Oh, we worship. We worship among the ruins as a continual reminder to ourselves of their cruelty and impiety. We will not give them the satisfaction of stopping from worshiping God. Hiel was so caught up in all of his reasons for hating Judeans that it took him a while to recognize what seemed like an odd pile of rags by the side of the road just ahead. Every step took him closer, and as they did, the realization began to dawn on him that this was not just some garbage someone had left. This was a person. Or at least it recently had been one. He made out the human features, all bruised and bloody. And he began to understand what had made the priest and the Levite so upset. Clearly, this was a man who had been assaulted by one of the gangs of brigands that this road was so famous for. They had beaten him, taken everything, and left him to die. When he saw this, he wondered why the others hadn't been willing to stop and help him. I mean, weren't they all Judeans? They worshipped in the same place and according to the proper way. And yet, despite all of that, the priest and the Levite had felt no need to pause and help their fellow Judean. Now, they might have given the excuse, if pressed, that if they did touch him and he died, which honestly he seemed close enough to doing, that would have rendered them incapable of serving in the temple. No one who had come into contact with a dead body was allowed to serve without going through the purification rituals. But honestly, that was a silly excuse. The law was clear. The obligation to save a life was more important than any purity law. And anyways, neither of these two men had been traveling up to the temple. Rather, they were heading away from it. They did not have any temple duties. Not anytime soon. No, they had shown in their actions that having things in common, worshiping the same God in the same way, did not mean that they had to love one another. And perhaps seeing this man had made them feel uncomfortable, but they had felt no obligation at all to take care of him. As Hiel stood there looking down upon the bleeding Judean, he was left, however, with one question. What about me? What about me? He had absolutely no doubt, no illusions, that if their places were exchanged, that if he were the one beaten and left on the side of the road, this man would not help him. No, he would see only a cursed Samaritan who didn't worship properly. And of course, neither the priest nor the Levite would have given him a second thought, unless the thought was that he only deserved to be beaten. They'd not done anything for their fellow countryman. They would not have done it for him. But really, did that let him off the hook? Did he really want to be like them? No, the last thing he wanted to be like was a Judean. He did not want to become someone who judged and rejected people because they were different or did things differently. And so in that moment, Hiel decided to do the most un-Judean thing he could think of. He opened up his packs, took out a bottle of wine that he had been bringing back for trade and one of the jars of oil. And then he took his second best tunic and began to rip it up to make bandages. He took care of that wounded Judean and then put him on his donkey to take him someplace where he could recuperate. When Jesus was asked, "Who is my neighbor?" he answered the question with a story. And that story had a bit of a twist to it. He was speaking to fellow Judeans. They probably would have expected him to tell a story where a Judean was the hero, where a Judean acted in love towards maybe even a hated Samaritan. But Jesus didn't tell that story. He told the opposite story. He told of a despised Samaritan who chose to love someone that he had every reason to hate. And that's what makes what he did such an extraordinary act of love. And it says so much to us today. And it certainly provides an answer to the question of who we owe the greatest love to. If we want to live out the kind of love of neighbor that Jesus was talking about, we certainly cannot limit love to those who are like us or are close to us. Jesus tells the story as a way of illustrating that the more we choose to love those who are far away, that doesn't limit how much love we have. No. That's the thing that allows love to grow. Love is only limited when we fail to share it free. I think this story of Jesus can also teach us many things when we are tempted to look down upon and despise others for any reason. The Samaritans had never done anything to hurt the Judeans other than live their own life, worship God in their own way. It was the Judeans who had attacked them, taken their land, destroyed their temple, their rituals, and their customs. Jesus was saying something truly powerful when he suggested that a Samaritan could act in love towards a Judean. When we have acted in hurtful ways towards others, it's always easier to think of them as being less than us. So long as we don't have to face their humanity, our shared humanity, we may fail to come to terms with some of the things that we, or perhaps our ancestors, have done to hurt others. It is our own failure to live up to what God has called us to be that prevents us from being the loving people we need to be, that stops us from loving our neighbors. Jesus told the story about a man beaten, left by the side of the road. He told it to shake up our assumptions about human relationships and how they work. He told it to challenge you to think about such things in very new ways. It's not easy to do, of course, but I am so thankful that Jesus gave us this story so that we might remember it and meditate upon it. So take this story with you and do exactly that. Teach us, Lord. Teach us, Lord, what it truly means to love our neighbor. Amen.